Cool, welcome to a recording of the setup of Kubernetes for monitor development. So the goal of this is to be able to, at the end of this, be able to see the cluster setup page, the Kubernetes cluster health charts, and also the monitoring dashboard and all of the data on there. There's a few prerequisites. So having the GDK up and running is a prerequisite. I'm not going to cover that today. It's just assumed that you've got that going. Also having Docker installed and having kubectl installed. So yeah, this assumes you've got these GDK setup, the Docker install, and kubectl, kubectl, as it is sometimes pronounced. I'm also going to cover some stuff with the GitLab runner. So it also assumes that the runner GitLab runner has at least been downloaded and installed. Yeah, so to start with, we're going to create a new project in the running GKE. So projects, new project. So this is the project that is going to be accessing the Kubernetes cluster. You can also do group level clusters, but I'm just going to show project level for today. Yeah, so there's one already that does some auto DevOps stuff. So this one here, I'm going to call it Kubernetes demo. Let's give it that slug. Hopefully I haven't used that already. And create the project. So this auto DevOps deploy project just has like some CI/CD stuff that will that is gonna be able to like deploy to a cluster and stuff. Yeah, so the next step is to take a look at the Kubernetes pane for this project. Now, as you can see, there's no cluster attached. So yeah, what we want to do is we're going to add an existing cluster, but this cluster doesn't exist yet. So that's what I'm going to show next, how to set up a cluster on GKE. By the way, if anyone has any questions, just like feel free to pipe in or chuck them in the chat. Yeah, so all right, Kubernetes, setting up a Kubernetes cluster in GKE. So the monitor team has this namespace. So at least for monitor team members, this is the one to use. There's also a GitLab internal, which any GitLab employees can use, but it's limited by like the number of IPs and a few other things. So if you do create a cluster there, just make sure to remove it if you're not using it anymore. So for now, I'm gonna go with monitoring development and create a new cluster. I'm gonna choose just your first cluster because it has some really like low requirements. Actually, no, let's go with standard cluster, just maybe to show like have a higher number of nodes and stuff. So yeah, give it a name. So in this case, ideally you probably want it to be identifiable back to you, so I've put my first initial and my last name. Kubernetes setup demo. It doesn't really matter what the name is. It doesn't get referred to by anything. Standard CPU, a couple of nodes. For development, it probably can just be like one node, if you like. Depends what you're using it for, but everyday usage doesn't need more than one. So this is now being set up. So yeah, this will take a couple of minutes. Yeah, so the next steps I'm going to go through, I can show a peek, will be, they're documented here in the GitLab documentation, connecting GitLab with a Kubernetes cluster. So going down to this, adding an existing Kubernetes cluster is what we're going to be following. Yeah, so I've actually already gone to this page, as you saw earlier, to add an existing cluster. So we'll give it a name, Kubernetes demo. The URL, this will come once the cluster is created. This looks like it might have something. Has a endpoint at least. So we'll set that as the URL. There's also other ways of getting this information. So here, there are a bunch of shell commands that will do it. Any questions while this is deploying?
Does the default Google Cloud Platform use HTTPS for this, or is it HTTP only?
That's a good question.
It's only HTTPS. You're gonna use HTTP.
Right. I can look at what I've done for another cluster. Looks like HTTPS. So that should be HTTPS. This will also be given to you. Oh, nice, it's finished by these shell commands. So if I want to run these, I first need to set my active cluster so that kubectl knows which one to talk to. So you can do this with this connect command. So if I run this, and then I run this command, the IP address should come up. Yep. Cool. So this is what gets copied into this this field. Oops. Certificates. So that's here, or similarly, there's a command for that. Service token. So as these docs explain, we need to set up a couple of accounts on the cluster so that the GDK can interact with it. And then, because it will be interacting using the tokens to authorize itself as these accounts. So the instruction says create a YAML file with these contents. So I've already done this. If as you can see here, there is this file. And then I think it's in this folder. Yeah. So if I apply it to my currently assigned cluster, this will create a couple of accounts. So as we can see here, it's created the accounts. Now I need to retrieve the token for the account. This is my token, and this is used in this field here. Right, so that's everything that we need to add an existing cluster to a project. So here we go, we're now connected to a cluster. If I go back to the previous page, now instead of just the add button, there's also the list of the connected clusters. For development purposes, enough, and just with the default settings and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and install Helm Tiller. So Helm Tiller is there to install some of these other services. And in particular, we want to install Prometheus, because Prometheus is going to provide us with metrics data about the cluster itself. Yeah, so that'll take a minute or so. Once that's done, once this is done, we'll be able to install Prometheus. Cool, looks like it's done. And then once Prometheus is installed, we'll be able to see the cluster health charts. So this is kind of the first objective that you want to get to when you're like setting everything up. Is you want to see the cluster health charts, and then you know that at least the cluster is running. And for some development tasks, like this will be enough. If you're just if all you're doing is modifying the cluster health charts. Once this is installed, it also will take a few minutes before it gets data. I think by default it polls once every minute. So I will show a cluster that I've prepared earlier. Here we go. So yeah, this is what you'll see. I'll just refresh the page so you can see it loading as well. This is what you'll see once the cluster has been connected for a while and it's got some data. I believe there's also a way to preload it with data, but for basic development, like getting your environment set up for the first time, it's not required. Yeah, so you can see these charts. They just show kind of the memory usage and the CPU usage of the cluster, the entire cluster. If we want to look at like the memory usage or CPU of a specific node, that's when we get to the metrics dashboard. So that'll come next. Let's have a look at how our original cluster is doing. Looks like it. Oh, there we go. So it's loaded, but there's no data yet. So looks like we have a single data point. Cool. So the next thing is now that we have a cluster, we want to deploy something to it. So for that, we need GitLab Runner. So GitLab Runner is basically like a separate application that can deploy things, and it gets talked to by the CI/CD scripts. So for this, if we look at pipelines, you can see there's no pipelines or no environments, but if we were to run a pipeline, it would not complete unless there was a runner available. So runners execute pipelines. So if this is your first time setting up your dev environment, you probably won't have a runner available. It is possible to install, let me go back to my cluster, to install a runner on the cluster. And this is generally like the preferable approach, except for one thing. So the runner needs to be able to access your computer, or it needs to be able to access your GDK, basically, the GitLab instance. The problem with that, if you're running the GDK locally, is it would need to be able to access your local computer from the Kubernetes cluster, since this install button installs it inside the Kubernetes cluster. So GKE would need to be able to see your computer. So essentially your computer would need to be available to the internet. There is a way around this. So there's a proxy that GitLab employees can access. I think you need to open the instructions are in a document somewhere. This one, the how-to runner. This is in the GDK setup. No, actually it's not. The instructions are in the auto DevOps how-to. Let's see if, nope. Let me find these. I'm using not the browser that I normally use. How to auto DevOps. So this kind of details the proxy. So if you want to test, if you have a reason to be testing the runner and it needs to be in Kubernetes, and you have a local GDK, you can use this, you can go through this to get them to talk to each other. But for today and for like initial development setup, it's also something that you don't necessarily need. So I'm going to show how to get it running with a local runner. So having GitLab runner running on your local machine solves the problem because it doesn't have to access something over the internet. It just accesses the GDK from within the same network. So the GitLab runner docs explain this. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I'm just going to show how to register a runner. So if we go to so assuming this assumes you have GitLab runner installed. The install instructions are in the docs, and they're like platform dependent. So pick whichever platform you need. The other prerequisite for this step is that you have Docker running, because we're going to do the Docker executor install. Yeah, so one thing you need to do is to, because the runner talks to your instance, it needs to know what IP it is. So we're going to go and get the IP address of the computer. So within my local network, this is my IP. And then to configure this, we have to go to the GitLab YAML, which is in the root directory of GitLab. Then go down to GitLab settings, GitLab host, and set this as the current IP address. And once we do this, and then restart the GDK, it will now run with the knowledge of its IP address, rather than like localhost. For some reason, localhost doesn't work with the runner. I'm actually not sure why. I don't know if it explains the reason here, but it just says you need to have your IP address. So like you can see I'm accessing, or I was accessing my GDK from the IP. So if that works, then the IP is configured correctly. And I've got a couple of runners already, but I'm going to show how to add another one. Yeah, I'll just wait for the GDK to start. Cool, looks like it's working. So we're gonna go GitLab runner. So you'll have access to this once you've installed GitLab runner, and then register to register a new runner. I'm going to use this URL for the coordinator URL, this token, local Docker runner demo. If you add tags, that will mean it will only run for jobs with those tags. Not something that we're going to use for the moment. And then I'm going to specify Docker and just pick a Docker image. Cool. And so we'll see this show up in the list now. It has never contacted our GDK. It will do so at some point, but just to kind of force it, I'm going to run GitLab runner verify, which gets all of the runners to try and contact, to attempt to contact their coordinator. So I'll remove these other ones so that we can make sure that we run with our fresh runner. I have a bunch of old runners that point to random IP addresses that aren't in use anymore, so this does cause a bit of noise. I haven't found a good way to clear out the registration list, but if you find one, let me know. So what we're looking for is our particular runner, the TA T1P, to show up. It seems to do these one at a time as well, which is annoying because it means all of these failures are going to slow it down. So I can show what we're going to do next anyway, so we're not waiting for that. So I've got my demo, my project and my cluster. Oh yeah, looks like our runner is alive. So we have this project, this like auto DevOps fork. So now we're going to try and run a pipeline. And we can see that this is in contact now, so that's good. So that is going to run. In the meantime, I'm going to show what happens once it has run in my sample project. So the environments page for this right now for the project that we've just created is empty, no deployments yet. So this is one that has had a successful pipeline run. It's the same project, so yeah, just a clone. So we can look at, once it's deployed, we can now look at the monitoring page. And this will contact the Kubernetes cluster that we hooked up earlier that has production deployed onto it now, and it will gather some metrics. So by default, you'll see these system metrics. So this is what you'll get with like the default basic setup. There are also some response metrics, which are enabled by switching on Ingress. So if you install Ingress, you get a few extra charts by default. But yeah, this is the metrics page, and this is more or less where you need to get to be able to start monitor development. Some things you can do with this page, you can create alerts. So you should be able to test that out now. And you should be able to add your own metrics using PromQL. Yeah. Let's see if this environment has been deployed. No, it still hasn't deployed. But yeah, so that's start to finish, how to go from a GDK to having metrics charts. Any questions?
For creating the like cluster role binding files and like setting up your cluster, I know that requires your Google account to have
oh yes, yeah,
like Kubernetes Engine admin permissions.
Yeah, that's an important point. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, so that's noted in these install docs. You need this specific permission. The best way to do that is via an access request. I'm just thinking if there's something I can link. So after this demo, I'm going to transfer what I said basically to like a Google Doc, not a Google Doc, like a Markdown, a README somewhere. So in there, I'll make sure to link a sample access request so that you can get the same access. Also, we should, like monitor team members should in theory be given access to this cluster. I don't know exactly what permissions we are given, but I know for myself, I didn't have to request access to this. So at least for monitor team members, it should be by default that you have access, at least for this cluster. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That is something that's important and would be a pretty frustrating roadblock if you didn't know.
I think we're running up on time here.
Cool. Sweet.
Thanks very much. This is awesome.
No worries. Yeah, hopefully that was a good explanation. And yeah, we'll upload it, and I'll add some companion docs so that there's a text format for this as well. Cool. Thanks, everyone.